The New York Rangers must stay the course with defenseman Braden Schneider, and we tell you why on today's episode.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1329 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, wanted to go ahead and take a look at somebody on the New York Ranger roster who I think is mostly liked by fans, but at the same time, there's certainly a group of Ranger fans that wouldn't mind the Rangers going in a different direction and moving on from this player, and that would, of course, be none other than defenseman Braden Schneider, who just completed his fourth season as a member of the New York Rangers. And to be fair, it could definitely go either way in the short term and in the long term with Braden Schneider. It's very easy to envision a scenario where he's an ex-Ranger within the next season or two. It's also, for me, pretty easy to envision a scenario where 5, 6, maybe even 7 years from now, he's still here and he's still a pillar of New York Ranger hockey. So it's an interesting debate to be had for sure. I'm in the camp of keeping Braden Schneider around for as long as you possibly can, and I'll elaborate on that in just a little bit. But the first thing I want to do is give Schneider a fair trial here and go ahead and take a look at the opposing viewpoint, because there are some Ranger fans that are talking about the idea of maybe even trading him this offseason. I definitely would not do that. But, you know, there's, I guess, at least a case to be made to deal him this offseason or next offseason when he will be a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. But as far as a couple of the reasons to potentially move on from Braden Schneider, again, we'll start there, and then I'll kind of make a counter argument the other way and have a verdict at the end of today's episode. But you can make an argument, and a fairly compelling one, to be fair here, that the Rangers already have enough years and enough dollars committed to the right side of their blue line, to their right defenseman. And specifically, we are talking about Adam Fox and Will Borgen. Adam Fox is signed for the next 4 years at $9.5 million per season, and you have Will Borgen signed for the next 5 seasons at $4.1 million per year. And by the way, just the idea that Will Borgen is signed for 1 year longer than Adam Fox, that kind of blew my mind a little bit when I looked this up. It's one of those things where I think you're kind of aware of it subconsciously, but you don't necessarily think about it or realize it. And then you actually look at a website like Puckpedia and it's like, yeah, wow, Borgen is actually locked up for a little bit longer than Adam Fox is, despite Borgen actually being a year older than Adam Fox. But the bottom line here, for anybody that is looking for the Rangers to deal Braden Schneider either this offseason or the following offseason, when once again he will be an RFA with arbitration rights, I think one of their most compelling arguments is, again, the commitment they've already made to the right side. You've got a situation here where the Rangers, between Fox and Borgen, they are spending $14.6 million per season on those two righty defensemen on the right side. So it wouldn't make a ton of sense to break the bank and spend a whole bunch more money on your third righty defenseman. That might be a situation where you try to go cheap as far as your third righty defenseman is concerned and save a little bit of money there and save some cap space there. It's not a bad argument, but I do have a counter argument for this point here. And I'm actually going to save that for a little bit later in today's episode, but we will get back to that in due time. But I think another reason why maybe Ranger fans, it's not necessarily that they just want to like run Braden Schneider out of town or just take whatever you can get for him. But I think certain forward-thinking Ranger fans do worry about the cost of Braden Schneider in general. I just mentioned it relative to the fact that you're already paying Adam Fox mega bucks and you're already paying Will Borgen significant bucks for the next bunch of seasons here. That's all well and good, but just in general, the cost. I think whenever it comes to free agents, whether we're talking about in-house Ranger free agents or players from around the league, this is something that we're always going to have to think about. That's just the nature of the business. That's kind of how it goes when you're dealing with the salary cap. And the salary cap has been rising steadily and should continue to do so. But be that as it may, there are still difficult decisions to make. And none of these decisions should ever be taken lightly. But Braden Schneider right now is currently making $2.2 million per season, and his contract will expire at the end of this forthcoming season here, the 2025-2026 season. That's assuming that the Rangers do not do an in-season contract extension with Schneider, which I don't think they would do. But then again, Chris Drury does seem to really like his in-season contract extensions. He's done that multiple times over the years, and maybe one's coming down the pipe for Braden Schneider. That could certainly at least be possible. So again, the cost. You have a lot of tough decisions to make, and you do have that loaded free agent pool next offseason. There's a whole bunch of superstar players around the NHL that are going to be unrestricted free agents, at least as of now. I realize some of those players could re-sign with their current team between now and then, but the list, if you look at it right now, is pretty crazy. And you don't want to miss out on a bona fide superstar player, a do-it-all kind of star that could come in to the New York Rangers and obviously make a massive impact. You don't want to miss out on a player like that because you're paying a little bit too much to somebody like Braden Schneider. And if you keep Schneider on the right side and you do re-sign him, again, that's your third righty defenseman that you're paying significant bucks to. So, that is certainly something to be considered. I can certainly appreciate the fact that, Schneider, it's not a travesty if he were to be traded. It's not going to cripple the franchise forever. I do think he's a good player, and I do want him to stay, but it can't be a blank check for Braden Schneider. And I do understand that for the people that are, making that argument. One other thing that I got to point out here too, in the interest of total fairness, when it comes to Braden Schneider, I was surprised to see his takeaway giveaway ratio from this past season. It is not good at all. It's really not that great for his entire career, but in the past, whether it's me or some of you guys or anybody else on social media, Ranger fans around the world, whoever it might be, there have been times in the past where we've really criticized K'Andre Miller for the amount of mistakes and specifically the amount of turnovers and the turnovers that seem to occur at the most inopportune of times. But so if we're going to be completely fair here, we have to do the same thing for Braden Schneider. And when you look at what he did this past season in terms of takeaways and giveaways, just 19 takeaways against 96 giveaways for Braden Schneider this past season. So obviously he had some puck security issues. I know giveaways and takeaways can be a little bit fickle and they're somewhat difficult to score for the official score, but I don't think 19 takeaways against 96 giveaways happens completely by accident. I think certainly any player that comes up with a ratio like that, they have to answer to it for sure. And Miller, by comparison, last season, obviously a rough season for him as well, but 47 takeaways against 97 giveaways. So Schneider's was actually worse. And if you look at Schneider's career ratio, again, you're looking at 74 takeaways against 207 giveaways. Compare that once again to K'Andre Miller. And Miller is at 257 takeaways against 281 giveaways. So Miller actually has Schneider beat in that department. I still would prefer, if it comes down to one or the other, and we're going to talk about this later in today's episode too, but if it comes down to committing long-term to either K'Andre Miller or Braden Schneider, I would take Braden Schneider. And frankly, it's not really that close. But in this one department here, the perception is that Miller is the one that makes all these mistakes and has all these turnovers. And his turnovers seem to be a little bit louder. And like I was saying before, they come at like really bad times, do K'Andre Miller turnovers. But as far as just ratio goes, Miller actually does have Braden Schneider beat in that department. So that is at least food for thought. And if you're somebody that wants the Rangers to move on from Schneider, maybe you're a K'Andre Miller fan and you'd rather the Rangers do the opposite of what I just suggested, keep Miller in the fold long-term, recognizing that maybe he has a little bit higher upside than Braden Schneider does. That's certainly a feather in your cap there, and that's certainly an argument that you can make. But with all this said, again, I'm still on team keep Braden Schneider, certainly for the short term and potentially for the long term as well. We'll talk about that in just a second and see if a long-term extension at some point is feasible and is smart for the Rangers and Braden Schneider. We'll get to all that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I gotta have the no shells variety. It is the perfect grab and go snack for those busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or whatever it might be, they're always there in the clutch. They're always a great go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are always a classic favorite. The satisfying crunch of opening each shell, it is like snack meditation. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works just as hard as you do. Get snackin', get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. A big shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for sticking with this podcast, including this current batch of pre-recorded episodes. Some of you might know that I'm taking a vacation soon, so hammering out a bunch of episodes to go live at different days, different times when I'm on vacation. So hope you guys are enjoying it. In our next episode, the plan is to talk about the newly hired New York Ranger assistant coaches, which includes, of course, David Quinn, who was the Ranger head coach for 3 years. And obviously, a lot of Ranger fans are having some pretty strong opinions about that. But we'll save that discussion for the next episode. For right now, let's go ahead, keep the focus on Braden Schneider. And really, the case to be made for keeping Braden Schneider here, certainly in the long term, certainly in the short term, potentially in the long term as well. One of my first couple of reasons here is that the Rangers have already moved on from quite a few players that were supposed to be part of this rebuild, that were supposed to be important pieces, high draft picks, guys like Capo Caco, they trade him, they get Will Borgen in exchange for him. Somebody like Philip Hedl, they deal him away as well. With Hedl, it's a little bit more justifiable because of the injury history, which is obviously very unfortunate, but it is a fact. He's got that very scary concussion history, and the fact that you did get JT Miller for him. But are we really going to do this? Are we really going to trade like every player, every young player this team drafted, every young player that this team brought in to facilitate the rebuild? Are we really going to get rid of all these guys before any of them turn 24 or 25 years old? I'm not really on board with that. There's talks even of potentially trading Alexis Lafreniere. I'm not on board with that either because you would be selling low on your former number 1 overall pick. And it would also kind of just put out this idea that the Rangers don't know what the hell they're doing, which some of you might believe anyway. But that would certainly lend even more credence to that theory if they were to trade Alexis Lafreniere a year after giving him that massive extension. And it's a similar situation with Braden Schneider. It's not quite as glaring because obviously with Schneider, he wasn't the former number 1 overall pick, but this is somebody that, comes in, debuts at the age of like 20 or whatever he was, jumps onto the ice, and basically looks like he's fit ever since then. And I'm just not on board with the idea of moving on from a 23-year-old defenseman who has already established what I think is a very safe floor in the NHL and might have his best days ahead of him. This is somebody that's played in all these playoff games and been an important player on this team, an important homegrown player. Like, this is your guy if you're the Rangers. You won. You've already won. You traded up in the draft the year that Braden Schneider was available. And this is the same year that they drafted Alexis Lafreniere number 1 overall. And the Rangers trade up in the first round to get another pick, and they end up drafting him 1 pick ahead of the Devils at number 19. The Devils picked 20th that year, and they took a defenseman. So by trading up in the draft, it's entirely possible that the Rangers not only got Braden Schneider, but that they prevented the Devils from getting Braden Schneider. So that's obviously awesome. But this is your own homegrown success story, Braden Schneider, if you're the Rangers. I'm not going to sit here and make it sound like he's a perennial Norris candidate or he's like this superstar player or that he's got this massively high ceiling, because I don't know that any of those things are necessarily true. But this is somebody that, again, has been a fixture in your lineup. He's been rock solid for this team, and I just don't really see the point in moving on from him. I mean, if you trade Braden Schneider now, everybody's got a price. And again, I don't want to make it sound like anybody is completely untouchable. If you were to be able to trade Braden Schneider and get in return somebody that you could immediately plug into your top 6, a forward, that's something to at least consider. But I'm not doing it for anything less than that. I'm not going to trade Braden Schneider for like a second-round draft pick. I'm not going to trade Braden Schneider for like a middling prospect or whatever it might be. Because, again, this is a theme on this podcast, but we have to stick with this because this is what the Rangers are doing. The Rangers' plan for this upcoming season is to reload and go for it. Just vault themselves right back into contention. I don't really see how moving on from somebody who has been one of your more consistent defensemen. I know that's a low bar based on what we saw this last season, but nevertheless, one of your more consistent defensemen. How does moving on from him, make this team better? Again, unless you get somebody that you can immediately plug into your top 6, then you've at least got something to consider. But I don't know. I mean, to me, he's been somebody that's very steady, very consistent through his first 4 seasons in the NHL. And something else that Braden Schneider does not get nearly enough credit for, and I've talked about it before on this podcast, but it's probably been at least 100 or so episodes at this point. His ability to adapt, his ability to play with different defensemen from all walks of life, from all different ages, all different sizes, all different playing styles, all different levels of NHL experience, whatever it might be. I think a lot of Ranger fans really take that for granted. And whoever Braden Schneider is out there with, and some of them have just been flat out bad. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it. But Braden Schneider has had some, frankly, lousy defense partners throughout the years. He's had some good ones too, and some guys that, you can certainly see it working with Braden Schneider. But it feels like no matter who he's out there with, he always plays his game and, again, plays a mostly solid brand of hockey. But think of how he started. He was 20 years old. He gets called up about midway through the season. Now I'm getting my years mixed up, but it was the season. It was Gerard Gallant's first year, and it was when the Rangers made it to the Eastern Conference Final to the surprise of just about everybody. And Braden Schneider gets called up midway through that season, and they stick him out there on a defense pairing with Patrick Nemeth. Braden Schneider, again, joining this team that's having this great season. He's still very young, 20 years old, and he's out there with a defenseman who, for my money, is one of the worst Ranger defensemen we've seen in the past, I don't know how many years you want to go back, but it wasn't good. I mean, I'm just being honest here. Patrick Nemeth obviously struggled during his time with the Rangers, and that's who Schneider had to start with. And he didn't really miss a beat. He played mostly solid, consistent hockey. I would say he actually helped Patrick Nemeth at least a little bit. He played slightly better, did Nemeth, when he was out there with Schneider than, the revolving door of defensemen that we saw before Schneider was, ultimately called up. So that was his start. And then later that season, the Rangers trade for Justin Braun, and he's past his prime. I mean, he was still okay, but not a superstar defenseman by that point in his career. But, they go with this 3-man rotation there, and eventually common sense kicked in, and the Rangers made Nemeth the odd man out, and they went with Braun and Schneider in the playoffs and everything, and that was all well and good. But again, Rangers make it to the conference final that year. Schneider plays his role on the third defense pairing, and he's out there with a past his prime Justin Braun and a struggling mightily Patrick Nemeth. And he did great with it. And that was just a start. Because in terms of that adaptability that I was talking about and that ability to play with a whole bunch of different defense partners, listen to this list of defense partners that he's played with in the first 3.5 seasons that he's been here with the New York Rangers. I already mentioned Nemeth. I already mentioned Braun. I'm not even going to try to do this in chronological order, and I'll probably forget a couple of defensemen. But here's the list that I came up with as far as guys that played with Schneider. We're not going to include guys that played like just 1 or 2 or 3 games, but guys that had at least a decent amount of games out there with Schneider. So you got Keandre Miller, Ben Harper, Nico Mikkola, Zach Jones, Libor Hayek, Eric Gustafsson, Urho Vakanainen. I think he was out there with Victor Mancini very briefly at the start of this past season. Maybe like 8 or 10 games over the years with Chad Ruhwedel. And I think there was also a brief spell where he was out there with Jacob Trouba. That's a lot of different defense pairings. Just very diverse group. And again, for the most part, I don't think his game really ever wavers that much. I mean, he's had, poor games here and there. And obviously this past season, the Rangers were just bad in general. So there were some bad games for Schneider mixed in there. But honestly, like you look at the Ranger roster, you look at the guys coming back this upcoming season, and he's probably one of the players I worry just about the least about. Because whether he's on the third pairing or whatever the situation might be, I think for the most part, you're going to get steady hockey where at least you don't notice him night in and night out in a negative way. And there were a lot of Rangers that you noticed just about night in and night out in a negative way this past season. Don't think he was ever really one of them. I think for the most part, he was mostly pretty steady out there. But other reasons to keep Schneider: physicality and size. These things tend not to slump. Certainly the size never slumps, and the physicality, if it's there, it's going to continue to be there for the most part for most of these players. But he's 6'4", 213 pounds, 460 hits in 286 career games. This despite the fact that he averages about 16 or 17 minutes per night. So obviously he's hitting when he is on the ice. So if you're somebody who, opines that the Rangers need to get bigger and tougher and more physical and all that stuff, and I would agree with you, especially after this past season, but I don't see how you can say that and then also be of the opinion that, oh yeah, let's just trade Braden Schneider. Let's just get rid of Schneider for a draft pick. Doesn't really align those two theories. So if you are somebody that wants that, I can't imagine why you'd want this team to get rid of Braden Schneider this offseason. Also, the durability. This is, again, something else that kind of gets taken for granted. Really among, I think, it's not just Ranger fans, it's not just Braden Schneider, but I just think in general, players that are consistently out there every season for 79 games, 81 games, all 82 games, whatever it might be, they get taken for granted. This is a tremendously challenging physical and mental sport where, I mean, it's an absolute grind to be out there and to go through the season and take the punishment that these guys take in the regular season, not to mention what then happens in the postseason. But if you look at the past 3 seasons combined for Braden Schneider, he played in a total of 243 out of a possible 246 games. It would very likely be 245, but the Rangers pulled him out of the lineup for the last 2 games of the regular season this year once they knew that they were mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. And the reason they did that, we do have to mention this, is that there was a report in April that Schneider was in a sling and that he had surgery on April 17th to repair a torn labrum. Apparently, this is something that had bothered him for about 2 years. And given the fact that the Rangers were KO'd at that point, it was time to deal with this and get the surgery and essentially just kind of go from there. But other than this, I mean, this is the only injury that he's ever had since being up with the Rangers, and he never misses any time. And the belief is that he's going to be good to go for training camp, the preseason, the regular season, the whole 9 yards. So, it's not nothing, but anybody that's worried about, Schneider's game falling apart, he plays a physical style and maybe he's going to age like Ryan Lindgren. I don't think that'll happen because to begin with, Schneider's bigger than Lindgren, so he can hold up a little bit better with some of those punishing hits, whether he's doling them out or receiving them. And I just with the eye test, I mean, you could see when Lindgren was here, this guy took a beating every night, and props to him for being willing to do that. I do think Lindgren will go down as one of the more underappreciated Rangers of this era. But with Schneider, I never really got that impression. Does it ever really look like he's laboring? Does it ever really look like he's getting absolutely just thrashed out there? I don't think so. And again, you never know what can happen down the road. But Braden Schneider is 23 years old right now. I don't think we have to be too worried about his game falling apart if the Rangers hang on to him for this year, maybe 2 years on top of that. It's possible his next contract could be a bridge deal if he stays with the Rangers, and we'll discuss that in greater detail a little bit later in today's episode as well. But again, I'm not too worried about the physical toll that he's taken, because first of all, he dishes out more punishment than he receives. But even still, I think with his frame and his strength and everything, he can hold up as time goes on here. And he's 23 years old. So just in general, I don't think it's time to really worry about that. But another reason why I think he will be here and should be here is that this is somebody that I think the Rangers, their front office, their decision makers, they very clearly value him, because it's not uncommon when the Rangers are wheeling and dealing. There have been seasons recently where they're looking to add at the trade deadline, or even this past season, a lot of wheeling and dealing throughout the entire season. You had the JT Miller trade. The Canucks really wanted Braden Schneider in that trade. And my understanding is that it's not the first time the Rangers have been looking to do a deal and a team has asked about the availability of Braden Schneider. And to this point, Chris Drury has not budged on any offers, including Braden Schneider. The Canucks had to settle for Victor Mancini, who I think could be a solid defenseman, but clearly the Rangers do like Schneider and they value Schneider and they wanted to hang on to him. His name does pop up every so often when it comes to trade rumors, but Drury has not budged, and I do appreciate that. Now, on one hand, Drury and the Ranger front office, they have not gotten everything right, to put things very mildly. So are they overvaluing Braden Schneider? I mean, that's at least possible. But again, I think there's a lot to like about Schneider's game, and I think that their willingness to really hold firm and refuse to include Schneider in any trades that they've made over the last few seasons, I think that speaks volumes about how much they value him. And I think that they would like to keep him around long-term, certainly short-term. It could come down to length of contract and financial demands and all that good stuff. But for the time being, I don't think they're going to move on from Braden Schneider unless they feel like they absolutely have to. And in just a second, we're actually keep everything going here with Braden Schneider. We're going to come to a verdict, some final thoughts on this entire situation. I'm going to make my case to all you as far as why I think Braden Schneider should remain with the New York Rangers. Certainly short-term, hopefully long-term as well, if it's feasible. But we'll talk about that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers with a verdict on Braden Schneider. And if you haven't figured it out by now, I'll just spell it out right here. I am a Braden Schneider fan. I would like to see him stick around with the Rangers for the long term. I mentioned early in today's episode, and we're getting back to this now, that I would eventually have a counter argument for everyone who feels like, the Rangers are already overloaded when it comes to the right side of their defense, and they look at the cap hit for Adam Fox, and they look at the cap hit to a lesser extent for Will Borgen, and think that you should go cheap with your third ready defenseman. And you wouldn't be able to do that with Braden Schneider, and that's why you trade him and bring in somebody for cheap. So I can understand that viewpoint, but here's my counter argument for that. Who is to say that Braden Schneider cannot handle the left side to help the Rangers essentially navigate this imbalance that they have between the right side and the left side? Who's to say that Braden Schneider can't handle that assignment? I mentioned earlier how he's played with all these different defense partners and how adaptable he is and how he just goes out there and makes it work and plays a very steady, consistent brand of hockey for the most part so far in his AHL career. And when you're talking about young players, I mean, that's an area where they tend to struggle with overall just consistency. And that hasn't been an issue for Braden Schneider at all, I don't think. I mean, again, there's ups and downs every once in a while. Every player has them, but not in a glaring way, I don't think, for Braden Schneider. This is somebody who's been extremely adaptable. And if I'm remembering correctly, I do think there was a short spell where Braden Schneider actually did get a couple of reps on the left side, if I'm not mistaken. Was he with Borgen for a time this past season? I think he might have been. I don't think that was a very long-lived defense pairing, but I don't see a reason why Braden Schneider can't handle the left side. And again, if you are concerned about giving too much money to your third pair ready defenseman, then make him your first or second pair lefty defenseman. Why not? I mean, if he can handle it, then by all means. I think that's something they should consider trying in training camp and the preseason. And I'll take this argument a step further here. Not only would I give it a shot and just see how this works, I would look at Braden Schneider as honestly one of the front runners to be Adam Fox's defense partner next season, at the start of next season. And of course, that would entail him moving to the left side. And we don't know how this offseason is going to shake out. We don't know if Keandre Miller is going to be back. We don't know if the Rangers are going to trade for anybody, sign any defenseman in free agency. Maybe there's somebody else that would make more sense. But the way things stand right now, with Keandre Miller's future being uncertain at best, he obviously still does not have a contract. And with there being no other obvious options in-house for the Rangers, why not try it? Get the absolute most out of Braden Schneider. Right now he's on a $2.2 million contract. To me, that's more than fair for Braden Schneider, and he will get a raise on his next contract for sure. But you could maybe make him a top pair defenseman and put him out there with Adam Fox. And it would be somewhat similar to the Fox-Lindgren dynamic. And I know Lindgren struggled this past season with the Rangers. That was a darn good defense pairing for a lot of seasons with the New York Rangers. But I think Schneider honestly would be an upgrade. He's obviously quite a bit younger at this point than Lindgren was. He's bigger. He's got more physicality. Probably a little bit better of a puck handler, I would say. Just a little bit more of a dynamic player is Braden Schneider. I think you get more offense from Braden Schneider than you do from Ryan Lindgren. So why not give this a shot? I mean, if Keandre Miller is back next season, and again, that could go either way, then you're probably looking at him starting next season next to Adam Fox on that top pairing. Although that would require breaking up Miller and Borgen, who at times, did play well together last year. But I still think Miller would be the front runner to line up next to Adam Fox. But if Miller's not back, you tell me who's a better option on this roster to line up next to Adam Fox than Braden Schneider. Once you get around the whole lefty-righty thing, it doesn't sound that bad, right? I think the two of them complement each other, pretty well next season. If the Rangers don't bring back Miller, and if they don't add a lefty defenseman in free agency, which they may not because it might be difficult to do so, and it is a thin free agent class, then I think Schneider's your guy there. So that, to me, just only adds to Schneider's value for next season and maybe even beyond. The fact that he could be a solution as far as playing that top defense pairing next to Adam Fox. One more thing that I'll throw out there to really drive home the point that I would keep Schneider, certainly in the short term, potentially in the long term as well, is that I will take Braden Schneider over Keandre Miller any day of the week. We talked about this very briefly a little bit earlier in the episode. Schneider, to me, just looks more physical out there. He seems more engaged in the game. And despite the turnover ratio, I would also opine that Braden Schneider makes fewer mistakes than Keandre Miller. It might be that Schneider's mistakes just don't stand out as much, because I feel like with Miller, every time he makes a mistake, it leads to a golden scoring chance for the opposition, or the puck ends up in the net, or it happens at a really, really, clutch moment in the game. We're talking like tie game with 1:30 to go, whatever it might be, and he makes a bad pass in the defensive zone or whatever it might be. So there's that to consider. If it comes down to we can only afford Schneider or Miller, I'm taking Schneider. And I think you could probably get Schneider for a little bit less money than Miller as well. Miller right now, without looking at the salary cap situation, I believe he's at $3.82 million per season, something like that. And as we've talked about on here, him and his camp are said to be seeking a substantial raise for this upcoming season. And I don't know exactly what that is. But with Schneider, I feel like you could maybe get him under contract in his next deal for like 2 years at $4 million per season. He will be an RFA with arbitration rights after this season ends. And then it's 2 seasons after that when he becomes a UFA for the first time. So if the Rangers do hold on to Braden Schneider, I think it only makes sense to do it in a way where you don't overcommit and you do that bridge deal and you take him to his first year of unrestricted free agency. And at that point, you can cross that bridge when you get to it. How do we feel about Schneider as a UFA here? Is he worth whatever he's going to get on the open market? You can take it from there. But for the short term, certainly don't trade him this offseason. I would not even entertain that idea, not in the slightest, because he's still under contract at a very reasonable pay rate. So you keep Schneider for this upcoming season. And then in the offseason, when he's an RFA with arbitration rights, that's when you look to do that bridge deal. And you try to keep it as reasonable as possible. Again, I think 2 years, $4 million makes about the right amount of sense for Braden Schneider, $4 million per season. I think that's fair. And so in my world, in a perfect world for me, I think Schneider's here for at least another 3 seasons. The one drawback to this, and it goes back to something that we've talked about on here, I don't like the idea of the Rangers signing free agents past this upcoming season because, again, next year's free agent class is absolutely just bonkers. Like, there's some superstar players that are going to be available, and I don't want there to be a situation where the Rangers can't afford, like, Connor McDavid or Adrian Kempe because they're paying too much money to Braden Schneider. And again, if you share those concerns, I can certainly understand that. But that's where him being under contract right now certainly helps you because you let him play out the final year of his deal this year, and then you reassess in the offseason. And if you're the Rangers, you look at it. Okay, do we want to add via free agency here? Do we really feel like we've got a shot at this superstar player or that superstar player? And if so, you go and get those superstar players. And if Braden Schneider becomes a cap casualty at that point, then so be it. You can trade him and move on. But if you don't end up signing a superstar player and you do have money to burn next offseason, I wouldn't mind the Rangers keeping Braden Schneider in the fold for the short-term future after that. As far as what I think they'll do, I think for sure they'll keep him going into this season. I think they prefer him over K'Andre Miller, and if one of those two is the odd man out, I think it probably will be K'Andre Miller. And again, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it this next offseason when Schneider is an RFA with arbitration rights. Again, it's going to depend what else the Rangers want to do with their cap space and what have you, but I think it only makes sense for them to at least strongly consider the possibility of keeping Braden Schneider in the fold, certainly for this upcoming season and hopefully beyond. But we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @JChik17. Once again, that is @JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.